Facebook Live, hello. Can you hear? Oh, no. So, you ready? Yeah? Okay, microphones are going on. And welcome back to Talk Recovery Radio. You're listening to us live on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM, and Darren just finished an awesome interview about Step 11, just some awesome conversations going on there, and you can replay that on our SoundCloud later on at talkrecoveryradio.com, and every Thursday we come to you at the second half of the show with a personal story. Hello, Shannon, how are you?
Good, hi.
Hey, Shannon, you want to get closer to the mic there? There you go, right on. Thank you for being on our show today, Shannon. Really appreciate it. Shannon found her recovery journey in a recovery house, but before you got there, which was, I believe, Hannah House, kind of how did you end up finding rehab? Because you and I both drove down here. We're in the downtown east side. There's lots of people out there using drugs. What was your story to get you into a place to start your recovery journey?
I started out, I guess the best way to start that would be, I lost my mother at a young age to a heroin overdose, and my dad was also addicted. So his personal journey started when I was very young, and we lost my mother. Actually through the same center that I ended up going to myself. So I ended up growing up in and out of foster care and all different centers, and while he was doing his own personal journey to recovery. So
how old were you at the time?
I lost my mother when I was 1.
Okay, but using drugs and trying to find, you went to many treatment centers. Was that a few years ago, or?
So I started using drugs at about the age of 12.
Oh, wow.
12, 13, I was, running in and out of care, and probably made it through the psych ward by 18, 19, was in and out of hospitals, and by 21, my dad had intervened. He's been recovered for quite a while now, and put me into intervisions at Hannah House in Maple Ridge. So that was, I was 21 at the time. That was about 7.5 years ago. And so that was the beginning of my recovery. I'd went in completely unwilling. I had zero desire to be there. And my dad, we'd have this back and forth. He'd pick me up out of the hospital. We wouldn't have talked for a long time. And he would be like, "You're an addict." And I'd be like, "No, you're an addict." So,
and I'm sure there's a couple other words used. That's a really good point, because a lot of people end up talking about, you don't find recovery until you're ready. But you weren't ready. You didn't show up to Hannah House like, "Hey, I'm here. I'll do anything." Like, you were defiant.
Oh, absolutely.
You weren't ready. You still wanted to use.
Yeah.
So, why did you stay?
Going through treatment, even as unwilling and as I was, gave me the opportunity to get clean. Because I wasn't able to be high or loaded or anything through my stay, I got exposed to the 12 steps, whether or not I wanted to. So
you had a couple of days back to back, a couple of meals, a couple of good nights sleep, where the clarity kind of started to sink in, and it's like, maybe this is a good choice.
Yeah.
All right. Because so many of us, want to know why so many people are still out there using, and it's really one of those things where sometimes you're just not able to make a decision because you're impaired, and so you were impaired in the beginning where you couldn't make that decision. So is this a process of a couple of days, a couple of weeks? How long were you in rehab for?
2 months.
2 months, yeah. And that's it? Been good all since? What are some of the things that you've had to do to maintain your recovery?
Well, initially out of treatment, I decided that I was going to go back to the life that I had. That was the end goal, was, okay, the parents are at rest, I can, the job, I've gotten a job, and I'm 21, I'm going to do what 21-year-olds do. I'm going to party, I'm going to go out for my birthday, I'm going to do the New Year's thing.
I'm going to party sober.
Right?
Yeah.
And it didn't work, right? I went and tried to go back to the same life and the same friends, and like that hollowness, that emptiness was there, and that's all I could feel. And it's hard to go back, right? It's hard to go back to doing that same daily shuffle when you've been exposed to something better and like people that are like loving and compassionate. It's hard to go back to like that.
So were any of your friends like, very common story, especially, for, I hate to say the word younger people because it makes me feel old, but yeah, definitely, for 20-somethings, it's hard to not want to do the New Year's and not want to do the party in the Granville Street. So if we can go back there for a little bit, like, was anybody in your life saying, hey, Shannon, like, you just got out of rehab, like, maybe you should, like, how can we support you? Like, how was that? How did you get through that? You just gave in, or?
Yeah, I found I was met with a lot of people that didn't understand addiction, right? They would be like, why can't you? Or my last instance, the last time I actually used was someone who had been like, you're doing really good. Like, you should have a drink with us.
Yeah.
Like, they did not understand, like, the compulsion or, like...
Would you say they also don't understand recovery?
Yeah.
So, like, we say that a lot, they don't understand addiction, but they also don't understand recovery. So you've made it through that, you came back, and now you're back in recovery. So there's definitely a 21-year-old man, woman listening today who's at that stage in their recovery where it's like they're not in rehab, they're kind of, a year clean, their old friends are calling them, and Granville Street's looking good, and it's just an energy drink at the bar. Like, what do you have to say to them?
For myself, I had to build a life that made me not want to go back. Like, I had to surround myself with other young people. We were out, all summer long. We're out at the beach, and we're doing, we're hanging out. We're doing, having group sessions at our house, like board games, all the things that I thought were maybe boring when I first came in here. And now, like, we do it on a weekend basis. Like, there's no room for loneliness and boredom or anything like that. We went to the recovery dances on all the holidays, right? Surrounding myself with people that were interested in staying clean was like absolutely pivotal.
Now, your father's in recovery, and my condolences, for your mother who passed away a long time ago. Trauma is a part of addictions for many, many people. How can we help people that have trauma? Because I know where I work, there's a lot of, in the beginning, stories of, my father died. And even my story, my father's dead, and my father passed away. And it was something I talked about a lot in the beginning. It was almost like a story that I had ready to go, when it needed. Did you go through that, and how did you get over that?
Yeah, I think more so in my addiction. I had a big identity around, the girl with the junkie parents, or like the mom that had died from heroin, and I built a big life in addiction around that. I thought, if I wasn't doing heroin, I wasn't that bad. Or later on, when I found that I couldn't stop, I found that I had kind of reconciled that. Like, I would probably, follow the same path as my mother, and I got almost comfortable in that idea. And built an identity around that kind of trauma instead of, I had no other way of coping with it, so I kind of just accepted it in this sick way, and then used drugs and alcohol to as my coping.
And how did you get over it?
The treatments.
Or if you got over it, anyway. I mean, do you ever? I haven't gotten over it either. I just know how to cope with it. So, how was some of the things that you did?
Yeah, the treatment center I went to, one of the absolutely amazing things they taught me about was empathy, compassion and empathy. And when I got to look at my mom's story and my dad's story and the way that they were parented, that anger, that raw pain, like, really lifted. Because I'd stayed angry for so long and blaming for so long and hurt for so long, that when I got to look at, like, okay, where they had come from, how they were raised, when I got to look at them with, like, empathy and compassion, like, and how they could get to where they were, that...
Did you have that aha moment where you're like I remember my counselor telling me, have you ever thought about them?
Yeah.
in the relationship. Like, you always come from your point of view, like, this is what he or she did. Have you ever thought about them and what their growing up was like? And like, I can't even, like, I look back now and it's like these people, like, they moved countries at a time when, you know, with no money in their, like, just so much other stuff that I didn't even consider.
No. And when I got to see my dad as someone who was raised by alcoholics or, you know, an abusive stepdad and all that situation, like, how do you blame his journey? And my journey was, like, deeply affected by that. And when the anger melts away, and I think that took a lot of power out of my using, right? That, like, childish using that I was doing, where it was like, you know, it's your fault, and if you hadn't left me, like, I would have ended up this way. Like, all the power went out of that when I got to learn about, you know, empathy and compassion through treatment.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So you're in a relationship with somebody in recovery. So that is also another conversation I wanted to touch on. Hey, Winston, how's it going? A lot of people say don't date people in recovery. A lot of people say date people in recovery. I say date whoever wants to date you, because that's a good idea. You know, they like you, date you, you know? So what are obviously there's some hurdles in all relationships, but, you know, he goes to meetings, you go to meetings, there's lives. So, you know, I know when I meet people dating, it's like, you know, the relationship's really important, but in recovery, whatever you put in front of it, you usually lose it. And it's, what are some of the ways that you and Winston are able to get through recovery world?
Okay. Me and Winston both had a couple years in when we first started dating. I too heard that do not date in the first year. I immediately disregarded that and ended up with somebody who I was so close to relapse. He did end up relapsing, and you know, and it was a really dark time for my first couple of years because of that. So by the time me and Winston met, we both had a foundation of recovery. And it's so easy to build a foundation with somebody else and disregard all that early in recovery. You know, you haven't taken care of yourself, you haven't learned, you haven't, life experience isn't there yet. So when I met Winston, he had such a strong foundation that it was unshakable. You know, if I was not running my program properly, like he was consulting a support group and he was not dropping his program for me, right? He was not.
So do you have this, like, understanding in your relationship, like, look, you know, if you stop going to meetings and you stop, you know, we're gonna have to evaluate this because we're in this together, but we want to make sure that we stay together happy and so forth? Or do you just kind of go day by day?
You know, it's actually been pretty easy. There's been a couple hard conversations where, you know, someone's had to tell the other person something they didn't want to hear, right? Whether it's like drawing a boundary, like, absolutely not, like, I respect what you're going through, but I'm not going through it. You know, you're not dragging me down with your emotional roller coaster, like, and it's we've had the conversation, you know, like, relapse is the relapse rate is high, like, let's be honest. And like, I've had that conversation even with my father, that what will we do, how will we support each other, or if it would be better to part at that, and we haven't had to cross that yet. I'm really grateful.
But it's good to have that conversation and just have that understanding, because I think if you go in it blind, addiction's nasty and it's conniving and it lies and it comes in places where you don't think it's going to, and then one day you're in a toxic relationship and the last thing you want to do is go to one of those meetings.
Yeah, and it's not romantic to go down in, like, flames together. Like, I don't care, like, what anyone says. Like, that's not romance. Is like, you know, oh, we'll hang on together to the bitter end and we'll just, like, be sick together. Like, that's not romantic. Like, the reality is like, sometimes the best thing you can do for another person is to walk away, or to give them a break, or, you know, to just be like, I can't come with you on this journey.
So you recently moved out to Abbotsford, and you lived in New West for a little bit, and there's like mega recovery here and different recovery there, and you know, people get lost in all that, and it's sad. I mean, I got lost in it when I was brand new clean too, but now I understand. Like it's all beautiful. None of it's messy, and even the mess of it is beautiful. So, you know, making your recovery portable. How's it? Because we were talking about how you would go to AA meetings and it's just like really tough man, and you like that. I know a lot of people that don't like that, and you liked it. And what's it like moving around in recovery?
When I moved to New West a couple years ago, that was I had I think I was coming up on my 4 years, and that was a bigger struggle for me. I still had to, I was still very broken, so developing those like deep human connections weren't quite there yet. I wasn't super comfortable with people around me. I was still pretty toxic, and one of the things that my sponsor, which really helped me, is she's like, God has a purpose for you here. Like, God has a purpose for you, and to maybe help other people. So like, get yourself in the center, get involved, and I did that. I committed to a home group, and you know, and got a service position, and started sponsoring, and it helped. So when we decided to make the choice to move to the Valley, that was my immediate thought, was, you know, first, like, I don't want to go to new meetings. I'm just going to drive to New West every day, right? Like, I don't want new things. I don't want to meet new people. Like, it's scary. And then the next thought is, like, God's bringing you here for a reason. You know, like, maybe there's not as many young people, I find. So maybe, like, that'll be the next step for us, is to be there for the young people that come in, look around, and be like, everybody here is old. And because that was my experience. I was the only young person in the meetings in that area, and everyone else was 40, 50 plus. And when I finally got to meetings, and my dad brought me to, I was looking around, I'm like, my life is over. Like, this is terrible. Like,
your dad must be super proud of you, eh?
Yeah, he is.
You know, we got a couple minutes left. Do you find, somebody had mentioned, you know, it's hard to not talk about recovery with people in recovery. It's like when you talk to people in recovery, that's all they talk about is recovery. It's kind of like, what do you call that gym membership where people go? CrossFit. It's like, that's all they do is talk about CrossFit. And then I do a radio show called Talk Recovery, so it's really difficult for me not to talk about recovery. Do you find that, you know, any truth to that? Like, is your dad always taking your inventory, or? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. The first couple years were the worst. I would come home, I'd be ranting about something. Usually work, my struggles always seem to come out at work with other people and normal people, and he'd be like, "You're an ego." And I would be like, "You have no idea what you're talking about." And we'd get in this big righteous fight, and a couple years ago, he brought a girl that was working for him for me to sponsor, and he willingly handed over this girl. "I need your help," and like that was amazing. Like, that he finally respected my recovery enough to see that I could be of use. Yeah. And ever since then, we got to this place where, like, we talk super comfortably about recovery. We laugh. I phone him up, like, "When was the last time you went to a meeting? I'll see you tonight." Like, in this really comfortable way of talking recovery. And I can hear it more now. Like, I can hear the criticism a little bit better now. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you being on the show with us today. You know, 1 minute left. There's a girl out there struggling. You know, she's 5 years clean, not too sure she wants to do this anymore. You still go to meetings, you still do service. What gets you up out of bed to, like, say, yeah, I want to do another day of this?
I have this deep appreciation for recovery that I had to build. I had to put a lot of effort in, and for the longest time I wondered, like, you know, I'm still 3 years, why do I still feel like this? I'm 5 years, why do I still feel like this? 6 years, and on like that, without realizing how much effort and how much work it really takes to be here and getting in the middle and doing the work. And I do a set of steps every year. And, every year I do a set of steps, traditions, and I keep involved because it keeps me connected to other women, for starters, which is first and foremost important. And it also is, like, constantly keeps me growing. And Yeah.
Thank you for being on the show. I hope it
Thank
helps
you.
somebody. I know it will help somebody. And I just appreciate you being on the show. Thank you. Hi, Winston. Say bye to Winston.
Bye.
All right. Darren, we're going to be closing up the show with you. What do we got?
All right, stay tuned for World Poetry Cafe coming up on the next hour. And this is Tragically Hip, long time running. This is Talk Recovery, Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. See you next week.
All right. Thank you very much, Shannon. Darren, next Thursday?
Next Thursday.